Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Narayan, and welcome back to the Security Conversations podcast. If you're hearing that music, you know this is our special episode where we interview newsmakers and special people in cybersecurity. I'm very, very excited to welcome my friend Chris Eng, most recently Chief Research Officer at Veracode, but before that, a storied 20-plus year career in cybersecurity. Chris, you're in between things. What are you up to right now?
I left Veracode about a year ago after being there for 18 years, and now I've just been consulting with various companies, helping them with product vision and helping them take various things to market. So it's been a fun kind of diversion from being in one place for a long time.
Is it focused on startups only or companies of any size?
A lot of startups, but startups at different phases, right? So some are very fresh startups, and then others have been around for 10 plus years, but are still like in that kind of phase of growth. So it's all across the board.
I described you as a cybersecurity lifer, someone who's been around this industry from the very beginning, from the creation of the cybersecurity industry. And I was fascinated with how you describe it to non-tech, non-security folks. In a sentence, you're on the airplane and someone peeps over next to you and says, "Hey, what do you do?" How do you describe your career to non-tech folks?
Yeah, I mean, you could say, I find ways to hack into things before the bad guys do and kind of help those companies fix those. But my answer to that question has changed so much over the years. I would say security. Some people took that to mean physical security or antivirus. I would say computer
Security
stuff
guard outside
for
a
a while.
store.
Yeah, security guard, exactly. And at a certain point, I found that I could just say cybersecurity, and people really understand what that means. I used to hate that word, and now actually it makes things so much easier.
If I remember correctly, your career kicked off getting like backdoored into here through an NSA program, correct? Some sort of scholarship program that attracted high school students. Can you take me back to what that was?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I didn't know it was going to lead here, but it was aimed at people that were doing degrees in engineering or computer science or linguistics in any of the languages that they might be interested in. And they recruited you as an undergraduate, or sorry, as a high school student. You could go wherever you wanted as long as you got accepted into that college. They would pay for it, and then you would work for the agency for a certain amount of time after graduation as sort of a payback. So almost like a civilian version of the GI Bill.
And it's something you had to apply for? Were you like the math kid, the math whiz in high school, that this was like a natural thing for you?
Yeah, apply for like any other scholarship. Apply in high school during the beginning of your senior year, and you find out you get it. Yeah, and that they would take 25 people a year across the country, and I was one of the lucky ones.
And originally it was electrical engineering, correct?
Yeah, it was. I thought I was gonna uh, originally before I took this thing. I thought I was gonna go learn hardware design and go
Like, what
and
was your
go.
dream? Like when you went into it, what were you hoping, and what was like your grandiose idea of where this would lead?
I think I didn't know everything that was really out there, but I thought I'd be doing like integrated circuit design and go work for an Intel or an AMD or something. Was AMD even around at the time? But doing that type of stuff, right?
Right.
And yeah, I didn't really know what was out there, and I knew that I liked computers, and so it would just be something around computers and building technology that was the next generation of technology or whatever. It was as an 18-year-old, it's really hard to figure
Right.
out where you're going, but I was interested in that stuff, and I enjoyed engineering. And when I went to the agency after graduating from college, I did a lot of the hardware stuff for a good amount of time. So it was still keeping me interested.
What was this switch that flipped to figuring out software? Did that happen there, or did that come afterwards when you went into the workforce?
A little, I mean, it happened there to some degree. I mean, as a kid, I had kind of gotten into the software side of things a little bit, reverse engineering, learning from articles in FRAC and text files and things like that. But I really just thought of that as just computers, and it was just around, I didn't have all the tools. And so I read all these articles on how to do things, but when I wanted to go and like reverse engineer and like patch a game or something like that, I didn't have like the right debugger or any of that stuff. So that foundation was there, but again, it was just like hobby, kind of fun, interesting stuff. And I would say the switch flipped for me from hardware to software when I was at the agency, and I spent some time with Dave Attell, who we both know, and he was working more on the software side at the time.
Was he part of
And
that same program? I believe
yeah,
Vinny Lou from Bishop Fox
yeah,
was
Vinny,
also
yeah,
part of
Vinny
that,
came through
right?
the program. Yeah, Vinny was 1 year, I think, behind Dave and I, and yeah, there are other people that went through that
Was
program as
your
well.
Dave was your transition to software?
Yeah, he was working on the software side of things. I was working on hardware, and one afternoon we just spent a little time together. He just walked me through like a basic Stack Overflow exploit against, something that had an article written about it.
Solaris, Sun
Yeah,
Solaris,
I think
Spark or something. Yeah.
it was something like that, right? It was a very simple one, but just like seeing how that was done and learning about it and watching what could happen and seeing that root, prompt show up was sort of like, wow, that's really fun. And the next, I was in the sort of rotation program at the agency. So the next rotation I took, I did a software rotation, and I spent some time doing exactly that, like developing tools and exploits that were used for red teaming, which is, the NSA has a team that would go and basically pen test all the defense and military sites, and it was an unclassified org, and so you could just build stuff and it would get used, and it was a lot of fun, and it got me into the software side of things.
Do you remember the first time you realized that security was going to be your life? Security was an industry, security was a thing that you could attach yourself to?
I mean, I guess that, yeah, it's hard to say. When you saw all these people doing this type of software security work, that was kind of a sign that, like, okay, there's something here. There's a lot of complexity here. There's a lot of depth. There's so many unknowns. And so, like, the exploration space was pretty deep. And so that was one part of it. But then it was really the first job that I took after the agency, which was at Stake up in Boston, the first pure play security consulting firm. The idea that you could attract all these people that had these interests and talents in security and actually sell it to big companies that mattered and had these challenges. And when I went up there and saw how quickly that was growing and how fast that company was expanding and how much demand there was for it, I think it was pretty clear at that time that
The
it was
early
going
at
to be
stake
something.
years. The early at stake years was like the point of clarity. And you're skipping over a lot of it because your career, you've been very, very lucky and to have been at stake at that time. At stake was the consultancy that was born out of Loft, which is this, venerable old school hacking crew in Boston. How did you get linked up with those guys? Like, how did you land that job?
Yeah, one of the colleagues that I worked with on the red team at NSA took a project manager job up in Cambridge at Stake, and then immediately came back and started recruiting a bunch of us on the
Right, right.
technical side to come up there. And so, and of course, I'd known about the Loft. I had read the articles that they had
Those guys
posted.
had already
Yeah, exactly.
testified in
So
front of
it
Congress. They were already kind
exactly,
of popular, right?
yeah, it was familiar, and I was like, oh yeah, of course I'd like to go interview and work up there. And so he recruited several of us up there, and went up and interviewed, and it was all very fast paced. Interviewed like in a hallway when they were in between offices, and by the time I got up there, there were already like 80 people in the company, and it just picked up really
Just picked
quickly.
up.
This is early 2000s, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's funny to think about at the time, but like there was no, like, we were relying on raw talent. There was no methodology for
There was no
anything. How to do a pen
Metasploit. There were no
test. There was
tooling.
there's no tooling. Like OAuth Top 10 didn't exist till 2003. Burp Proxy didn't exist till 2003. Like we built
Correct.
our own web proxy and we sold it even as a product. Like we were making stuff up as we went along and learning how do you productize this? How do you build a service around this? Because there was nothing to base it on.
And the perfect time and the timing of at stake and the early consultancies at the time mirrored Microsoft's own problems with cybersecurity, right? So towards the end, when you saw Microsoft moving from being this pariah in security towards this trendsetter, it was because of like embracing companies like at stake and some of the IO Active and some of the other consultancies that came along later on to kind of bridge this controversial relationship that was at the time was happening between the security research hacker community and the vendor community. You remember Dave Litchfield
Yeah.
going to Black Hat every year because Oracle had this unbreakable thing, and it was just methodically this adversarial relationship. At the time you were at stake, you were mentioning the early 2000s, right? We are talking about Microsoft Worm era, pre-XP Service Pack 2, all of that stuff is still a giant mess. Do you have a favorite story or memory from that time, keeping all of that into perspective, that stands out from your at stake days?
Yeah, I mean, it really was right place, right time. Like you said, I mean, the trustworthy computing memo came out in, it was either 2001 or 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were positioned at the right phase of the company and the right expertise to go in and help with that. And so, I mean, it was a lot of fun to, um, I think within like 6 weeks of the trustworthy computing memo going out from Bill Gates, we were on site and
Right.
we were helping. They were in the process of building IIS 6. And as you know, a lot of those worms, a lot of those big exploits were in IS 4, IS 5, and
Right.
led to, some of these huge incidents that you heard of. And so they really wanted to get IS 6 correct. And they had changed a bunch of things architecturally and were really wanted to be thorough about not only pen testing it, but doing design review and architecture and threat modeling. And so they brought in us to help with all that stuff. And so we sat there in a tiny office, a bunch of us just kind of sharing space for months working on IIS 6. And the thing that's great about that is not only just being there at that point in time and working with the people and bringing some of those practices to Microsoft, which they continued to use for years after, but there weren't any CVEs in IS 6 for a long time after we were done there. And we continued to work with them on a lot of other products. And so I think that was just this great time to be in the industry as it was forming, as it was starting to be taken seriously by companies like Microsoft. And as you know, like many other large companies followed after that. But they were really, I mean, that set something in motion. And so to be there at a time was pretty exciting.
I mentioned the adversarial relationship because there's a separate school of thought that felt that Microsoft had kind of bought out a lot of the consultancies that were the loudest critics. And when you
Yeah.
came in as a consultant, you got onto NDAs, and then kind of removed that vulnerable thing. And I bring this up because were you at that stake at the time of the Dan Gear monoculture, Windows
Yeah,
monoculture report
sure
as well?
was.
Because that was a
Yeah.
seminal moment in our industry where Dan Gear and I believe some others, under the name of At Stake, correct? Under the At Stake brand,
Right.
published this report in a nutshell, warning against monoculture and the Windows monoculture and the risk of cascading effects of incidents. And he was fired from At Stake for it. At Stake was a Microsoft customer at the time. So there was, again, this element of like friction between there. What do you remember from that?
Not a lot. I mean, things seemed to happen very quickly, and it was clear that something had gone on, and clearly some conversations happened, right? I was like a lowly, security consultant. I don't know what was going on. I came in one day
Yeah.
and
It was
heard
like
about it.
emails flying at the top, right?
Yeah, I mean, he sat a few desks away from me, so it was a surprise, and it was definitely an eye opener in terms of like, wow, like
The
there's
kind of effects you were having,
yeah,
the
there's
strength of
things
your voice.
there's things happening here, and like people really don't like it when certain things are said, and like there's politics involved, and not the politics of today, but you know what I mean,
Right.
the corporate, and so yeah, it was an eye opener. But yeah, I certainly didn't get much exposure to it just from where I sat at that time.
For me, it was fun. I was a journalist at the time writing
Oh
about
yeah,
this
I
stuff.
bet.
So it was amazing to have a guy get fired for writing a report because it was
Right.
just like the business and the conjecture of it was crazy.
And of course, he turned out to be right. I mean, like everything that he
100%.
says is he's able to predict the future in this way, right? That sees things long before anybody else sees it, and so of course he was right.
So At Stake gets acquired by Symantec, and that goes off into a different direction. And you were one of the early folks at Veracode. The
Yeah,
Veracode years, what were you? Employee number what?
I was employee number 15.
Number 15.
So
Not a founder.
yeah, not a founder. I usually say like a part of the founding team, but
Right.
still to this day, I mean, the other day somebody introduced me as a Veracode founder, and I had to correct it. Right, so people still think that, and it was early days, so I
Yeah,
I, I
yeah,
get
yeah.
it.
What problem did Veracode set out to solve on day one? Like in the early days when Christian
Yeah, yeah,
and the
Christian View.
founders,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, it's interesting. They were working on this sort of binary analysis technology at Stake and Symantec. And originally, the idea was that it would be this tool, this decompiler tool that the consultants like myself could take out into the field. And when we went on site or when we were working on an engagement for a customer for a product, we could like throw the product into this tool and it would help accelerate the reverse engineering work because it would be a
hmm
decompiler. It would help us make sense of it. Some of the work that you would have to do manually through like IDA Pro and things like that at the time, right? It would
So
give
it
you
was
this
some
this
automation for
boost.
some of the pen testing security assessment work you were doing.
Yeah, it was like make the consultant a lot more efficient and faster. Now
Hmm hmm
the and that was the initial kind of use case for it. over time, and this is still in the Symantec days, that evolved into like, well, can you use this not only to help a skilled consultant, but also to find flaws in the code? And so they built some capabilities into that as well. And so it was clear that Symantec was not going to use that technology, is not aligned with, the yellow boxes and all the stuff they did. And so that's when I think Veracode spun off the technology. And I was not involved with the team at that time. I was still consulting. I was running a part of the Northeast consulting practice and
You're in
doing a lot of,
Symantec now,
yeah,
post
I was in Symantec advisory.
StatStake
Yeah,
acquisition, right?
yeah, Symantec. It was Symantec Advisory Services. We were doing the same type of work, but just under the Symantec logo. But in the meantime, all this stuff was going on. It was actually called. It had a number of different names. It was called Smart Risk
The Veracode
Analyzer.
product.
Yeah, it was called Smart Risk Analyzer at the time. The first name for it was actually Undeveloper Studio, but that actually never made it to a. I don't know if that ever got it printed anywhere. But anyway, they're spinning off the technology from Symantec because Symantec wasn't going to use it. Veracode starts up, they get some funding, and then Chris Weisopel, the other co-founder,
Mhm.
calls me up and asks if I'm interested in coming over. We had a little chat in his office. He told me what they were trying to do, and it was this idea of the same technology, right? Binary analysis technology. Use it to find flaws in software. And the thing that had changed with Veracode was that, oh, we're going to put it in the cloud. We
So
didn't
a
use those
SaaS
words.
version of right.
Yeah. There was the word cloud didn't exist. I don't remember if the word SaaS exists. So he had to kind of whiteboard it out to me to say like, oh, we're gonna right. The systems are
You're
going to
right
be
off
up
of
here.
our
The
computers
systems are
there.
going to be here in the internet, and people are going to send stuff up there over the internet. And Salesforce
It was
was
all
like the only.
magic to you, right?
Yeah, it was like a complete different approach, but like it gets rid of some of the customer support issues around on-prem software, getting people to have, powerful enough hardware and, not upgrading when they're supposed to, and it would kind of remove that from it. And so I saw the value of that, saw it was going to be hard, and we talked about it for a little while. I was like, what would this solve? What would be difficult about doing this? And but really, that was the difference. Is like we're going to do all this, but we're going to do it as a service. We're going to do it in the cloud. What do we
That
call it? We
doesn't
just call
exist yet.
it doesn't exist yet. We call it software security on demand.
Right.
Uh,
Which is might be a better name than cloud, if you ask me.
we didn't have the vocabulary for it, but that confused a lot of people too. So I don't know. And again, like once eventually people knew what SaaS was, and that
Right.
made things a lot easier.
Looking back, what do you think Veracode got right, like perfectly right, and what did you think you guys underestimated in this path towards secure coding, if you want to call it that?
Um, Well, yeah, I mean, the cloud part was huge, like I mentioned. I think recognizing upfront that AppSec is a people and process challenge as well, was big. It seems very obvious now,
What do
like
you
in
mean by
retro,
that?
like 20 years later. So, like, if
Explain
you're
that.
not okay, so you can find flaws and stuff, and that's great. There's a technical challenge there, and we did that really well. But if you're not treating this whole thing as a program with goals and metrics and reporting, then how is the customer supposed to show any progress? How are they supposed to, right? 'Cause we're not just talking about one application here. We're talking about dozens or hundreds or
Right.
thousands, right? And so, one of the things we did was we assigned a program manager to every customer to help with setting up those goals and those metrics and onboarding. We had a whole services team for getting developers and teams onboarded, explaining findings to developers, and so on. And so we positioned this as sort of an extension of your security team and not just this tool that you would sell them and then kind of walk away from. And so people loved the combination of that because it helped them kind of get from point A to point B with their program. And that was, it wasn't perfect, but over time you saw most other code scanning companies copy that approach,
Hmm.
this programmatic, enterprise friendly, metrics driven approach. And so, I think clearly that's how programs are run today, right? But we went from just like, hey, here's this really cool technology that we can sell you to like, here's a way for us to enable you and
Right.
be an extension of your team. And what do we underestimate? Or what do we not do well? I would say,
Was there a thing that there was an ambition to do early that never got done? Was there like a regrets that you didn't go in this direction earlier? What did you think you could have done better?
I think we thought everything was easier than it was going to be.
I just
Every
underestimate the severity of the
every
problem.
every language or the complexity of frameworks in every language was a lot harder than we thought that it would be. And just getting people to sign on to the whole cloud thing was harder than we thought it would be because people just weren't ready in 2007 when we launched to upload even binaries, much less source code, which we thought
Right.
binaries would kind of solve that. But we were about 5 years early in terms of the real willingness to do that, and so it was a tough time. And then as we got, I think, into the later years, we really, I think, underestimated the effectiveness of sort of the product-led growth strategies that were being used by some of the competitors that were catering really well to developers, right? There were a bunch, right? We felt that we were a lot further ahead on the technology, but it didn't matter when developers were kind of clamoring to use something else and something you could get time to value in like 15 minutes and kind of do that bottoms up, grassroots approach to things, which we were very CISO and enterprise
Right.
driven, and so we didn't have that product-led growth motion. We didn't have that developer friendliness, and we struggled with that. We'd experiment with free trials a little bit, but we had to play catch up on that one. And we learned from that. You saw, you would have seen in our acquisitions that we did of like SourceClear and Crash Test and other companies. These were all companies that did really well at that,
Hmm.
and so we tried to come at it from both directions. But man, things started moving fast there after a little while.
I know it's like I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the software supply chain space because a big part of what the problems you're trying to solve is this complexity of code coming from everywhere and so on. When you think about software supply chain, as your time doing the chief research officer work at Veracode through now advising companies and so on, is there like a meaty soft spot right now that stands out as like the biggest gap in where software supply chain is, or is it something that's even tractable or solvable? Is the question I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just such a mess, right? I mean, the borrowing of software. I mean, if you think about how much software you actually write yourself versus how much you borrow or import from somewhere else, it's in the single digit percentages, right? Everything is pulled in from somewhere, and then those libraries are pulling things from other places, and you end up with this huge mess of like transitive dependencies and so on.
Right.
Um, so like the whole honestly, I don't know if there's a good answer to like where is the soft spot because the whole thing is kind of a soft spot.
Just big giant ball of wax
There's
of
just so much dependency, right? From an attacker's point of view, you just got to look at NPM and all the stuff that's
Mhm.
happening there with the packages being backdoored. And some of them are pretty overt, right? Yeah, what was the one that happened a couple of weeks ago where like suddenly like 20 packages were backdoored and had malicious versions. But the ones you really got to worry about are the ones that are subtle and that are just like little changes sneaking in there over time, and then they're waiting for the right time to be used. And it's this sort of the long game around it.
Yeah.
That's where you really see the impact. Some of these ones that just happen, like okay, left pad gets subverted or some of
Right,
these
right.
little things, but it's just like a big news story happens, and of course now everybody's eyes are on that. But when you can be subtle about it, look at XZ, right? Look at the Magento thing from years ago, where
Right, right.
these are long-term campaigns, and so just exploiting these many layers of dependence that we have on software of unknown provenance, it just gets very messy very fast.
Right. What do you make of this, the previous CISA administration's push around secure by design and all this big energy around secure by design? It's kind of a different take on what we used to call SDLC back in the day, which is from beginning to end, you build security into every layer of it. Secure by design has these 10 principles, use MFA
Yeah.
here. Do you think trying to get a question, do you think this raises the boats, or are we just kind of just putting band-aids on small things here and there and hoping for the best?
I think it encouraged some practices that we all know by now are good practices, right? Like, for example, you mentioned the MFA one, like a huge piece of security hygiene that we know solves, like mitigates so many of the common attacks out there, right? And so when I think about security by design, I think a lot about application design, but they were thinking broader, right? They were thinking all the different things. They were talking about patch strategy. They were talking about MFA, and I think there were like five other
Yeah,
principles,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
That
How you manage identities, and there's like some principles at a very high
exactly,
level that you should
yeah.
bake into your program, right?
And I think it's the right direction, right? It's calling out those things. It's very hard to do these things at a national level. And they started out by saying, here are some things that you can be doing. and here's a way to like attest that you're doing that. And they got a bunch of companies to sign on saying like we're gonna
Yeah, that's
say
the pledge, and we'll do a
right, here's the
self-attestation.
pledge,
Yeah.
and we'll attest to this. And that's sort of a hard thing to scale. But the most important thing is seeing that type of conversation happening at the national level, right?
Happening at
Seeing,
all. Just the fact
yeah,
that it's happening.
I mean, seeing stuff about software supply chain security and even a little bit of talk around software liability in the national cybersecurity strategy in like what was it, 22 or
Mhm.
23, are things that, and granted, there's not a lot of specifics around what would happen there, but even seeing those terms in a document at that level, a
It was
national
a plan.
strategy,
Yeah.
is a step in the right direction. And that's kind of how I feel about secure by design. I think it's going to take a number of fits and starts with that to figure out what's the right level of
Mhm.
prescriptiveness, and where can you get with that. But of course, all the concepts are right, and you want to be talking about those types of things. So net, it's a positive.
Why are things so bad? I mean, I just want to pick your brain on. We've spent billions and billions of dollars on cybersecurity over the years. Why don't the outcomes look better? What is the harsh truth about why we're here? It's not for the want of smart people putting very, very heavy resources at these problems. Yet, when you just open any website today, Jaguar Land Rover is out of commission because someone couldn't keep a ransomware guy at bay. Airports are shut down because of ransomware. Hospitals are shut down because of ransomware. The government is warning us that some typhoon is in our infrastructure waiting for wartime activities. And like, it just feels like, holy moly, everything is terrible. Why are we here?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it all comes down to incentives and lack of accountability. To oversimplify it dramatically, right? Most of the people involved in building software, from the architect to the developer to the product manager, engineering manager, business owner, anybody, is not really incentivized or penalized in any way for releasing insecure products. They measure all sorts of other metrics, right? Uptime. If you're a SaaS product leader and you have too much downtime, like you're going to hear
Yeah,
about it from the CEO or the board. But if you code a bunch of SQL injection vulnerabilities and you don't update any of your dependencies in 5 years, like that's not going to hit your performance review, right?
right.
In most cases, right? Most places you go, security outcomes are not baked into design requirements, definitions of done, or anything along
Right.
the way.
It's a cost
Uh,
center. They have not seen it as an
it's
enabler.
it's this
Very few people
annoying
have. Right.
this annoying thing that's in your ear, like, oh, you should fix this, you should fix that. Like, and you might say, like, wait a minute, so many security tools are built right into the CI/CD these days, and that's true, they are, but like detecting the problems doesn't matter unless you fix them,
Right.
and people find reasons to ignore them. Like at my previous company, at Veracode, we would look at the amount of security debt that companies accumulated in their applications over time, and it wasn't pretty. So if you
Right.
look
And
for
it was going in the
problems,
wrong
it was
direction in
going in the
some
wrong
place. Yeah.
direction. Like a lot of technology is being built and it wasn't keeping up. So if you look for problems but you don't bother to fix them, like in a sense, you're simply turning ignorance into negligence, and that's a lot of what's happening. So there's not many repercussions.
What kind of repercussions you would want to see? Let's say I make you a CFO or a CEO,
You know,
right? What metric are you demanding from your CISO or your security team quarter over quarter, year over year to show that the chart is going in the right direction? Is there a specific thing that stands out?
I don't think it's formulaic, right? I mean, you can certainly start with the basics. We talked about, MFA deployment, number of incidents, mean time to detect, mean time to respond, recover. In AppSec, you could be looking at percent coverage around first party code, around third party. Vulnerability counts is not a great thing. Remediation time is a good one. Obviously, I mean, CISO has such a big remit, right? I won't get into
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
compliance, audit, security, all that stuff, right? You'll find if you look at any like security maturity model, you'll find those.
Right.
I think the more important thing these days is that the CISO isn't just like reporting metrics up to the CFO or the CEO, right? They're increasingly presenting to the board. I used to host roundtables on this topic, and I'd always ask for a show of hands how many of the CISO attendees were personally briefing their boards. And I watched as that number went from like close to zero to about half in just a few years.
Right. It
And
became a
so
boardroom level
it
discussion
it is.
because they were CEOs were seeing hacking and ransomware news on CNBC and the
Everyone's
boards
getting
yeah.
asked about it, right? And so the CISO increasingly has to be in lockstep with the business, and they have to be measuring and reporting on things in the context of the impact to the business, which is why to say that one metric, which is going to be important to one company, is maybe not the most important metric to a different one. Like maybe FedRAMP is going to open up a huge sales channel, and so you're going to work on things that would otherwise be like lower priority security wise, but it's going to have like a bigger impact on the business.
Right.
And so to be able to, I don't think that there's any single answer to like what should the CFO or the CEO be looking for from the CISO, other than understanding of how security relates to the business and how security is going to help the business, and a willingness to take things into context and make trade-offs in the bigger picture. And
Right.
that's the modern CISO.
We can't get through a podcast without mentioning AI and AI and what it's doing to code quality today and what it will potentially do to code quality down the road. I'm hearing a lot of warnings today about some of the earlier warnings we heard about in 2000 that left us with this tech debt
Yeah.
today that we're trying to mitigate. There's a lot of warnings coming out now that in all these big companies, 70, 60, 70, 80% of code is now being AI generated. What do you think this does to code quality as we move forward? What does the state of play look like 10 years from now when you and I are having this conversation, looking back at the last 10 years of what AI has done to us? Are you an optimist that this is going to be generally better for us, or are you worried that this takes code quality and the software supply chain space takes a dark turn?
Code quality. I mean, today you're not going to find anyone who says it's improving code quality, right? I hope. I mean, if you remember that LLMs are basically spewing out like probabilistic copies of other source code that it's seen, right? Whether it's
Nobody's not using it though.
Git, no, definitely, but it's copies of other things, right? That humans have written, and humans are writing vulnerable code, right? So it's just stuff that's on GitHub and Stack Overflow and Reddit and other corners of the internet. And there have been some really good studies that are looking at not only the security but also the correctness of AI generated code, right, across a number of different LLMs. And the net of it is that LLMs just aren't there yet in terms of a secure code, right? Nearly half the time they're producing vulnerable code. You can tweak your prompt in a way where you can add security requirements. There was an interesting finding that when you do that, sometimes you end up with correctness trade-offs. So you get a more secure piece of code, but it doesn't do the right thing. So that's a weird trade-off that you don't necessarily think is going to happen. Everyone I know right now that's building anything using LLMs or using coding assistants, I get some variation of, if you ask it to build something without guidance, you're going to get some sort of garbage. If you tell it exactly how to do things that you want it to build, then it can be pretty amazing. So which is to say, you save a lot of time only if you already know what you're doing. So it's
Right.
going to accelerate the process of generating the code. Maybe it'll save you the time of looking up the syntax and things like that and setting up the scaffolding for some framework. But if you're trying to do something that isn't just out there a million times in open source,
Mhm.
you're really going to have to help it along every single step of the way and say like, okay, I need this exact thing to happen, and it will write that code for you. And it's sort of a stepwise sort of thing. So there's a lot of potential. Obviously, there's a lot of potential, right? There's a potential for acceleration, which is already happening, but we haven't yet figured out exactly where the sweet spot is. I don't think. I don't know if you feel differently. It's just like
Well,
everyone's using it.
I'm just curious about what happens to this black box of code in the future. That's this long tail of AI generated code and what it looks like in 2, 3, 5 years, and the black box that is being generated everywhere. It feels like we're heading to a future where we're going to be talking about AI debt. We're stuck in this AI debt because someone wrote this code, or who knows who wrote the code, and who knows. There's a lot of that happening even right now. I mean, and that's the other thing. It's like no one is not using
Right.
your
Right.
coding assistants or your co-pilots, right? Like you have to just to be efficient and to keep up with demands of what code is happening. So I'm just curious if you have a worry that we're heading into a future of more hurt, or you think AI being used for both good and help solve some of the problems we're experiencing.
There's something I think about a lot with AI, which is that if the coding assistants are working because of this huge like treasure trove of source materials we have that we're borrowing from the internet, that's all been written by humans, right? And it's constantly ingesting more of that code, open source stuff, to refine the models or to make the next version of the model or whatever. Like, how long does it take before the model becomes less useful because it's increasingly based not on human generated source material, but it's actually its own creation. So it's
Right.
ingesting more and more of itself, and it's not, I don't know if it's contamination, but it's like reinforcing certain patterns over and over again. And does that eventually lead to like a model is there a point where the models become less effective or the model collapse? Or will we even recognize when that happens?
Right, right.
Will it happen gradually, or will suddenly things stop working? Like, because it's just kind of be feeding itself at a certain point, right? So that's one of the things that I think about as we think about code assistants, because if nobody is ever building anything from scratch on their own anymore, what's that going to do? And how do we're going to adapt to that as these new models come out? And then yeah, we're really struggling, I think, certainly CISOs, but everybody, just to get some sense of where is AI being used and how, and what data is it using and where is the data going. Talk to many people who are, just because of the speed that everything happened, that don't really have a good sense of where AI is being used in their enterprise and how. And
Shadow AI
right,
sprawl everywhere, right?
yeah, and it's the same thing that you saw with cloud, whatever
Hmm.
they used to call it, shadow IT, but the cloud stuff. And but it creates all sorts of nightmares for compliance and
Right,
regulatory stuff, and being able to answer questions from your customers about, right, as a vendor,
right,
like
right,
where are
right,
you using, and you don't have an answer to that. And you can see, I mean, parallels to attack surface management. You can see parallels to supply chain,
right,
right?
right.
It's like we're using all this stuff. Oh my God, we don't have any sense of where it all is. Let's wrap our arms around this and try and figure it out. It's the same story,
Which also
except it,
presents greenfield for startups trying to solve these problems or help companies manage these hiccups and problems, right? I mean, that's where you're landed right now, which is trying to
help,
figure out.
yeah, help, yeah, the visibility and understanding where things are to begin with. I mean, you can't lock things down or put guardrails around them until you know
Right.
where it is. And yeah, you're seeing lots of startups pop up around that. So yeah, there's so much to work on right now, and I don't want to seem uh, pessimistic about AI, because I think overall there's so much, like you said, there's so much greenfield there. There's so much that's going to be able to be done with this. Is code security one of those things? I don't know if that's going to be one of them or not, right? We know that it can code faster. Is it going to
Right,
eventually
right.
help us code better? I don't think anybody can be confident enough yet that to say yes that it is. But we're trying to figure it out.
What excites you about what you see coming in the next 5 years in cybersecurity? You're advising a lot of startups now. I imagine you're very well plugged into the VC ecosystem. Is there a breakthrough you think is underrated right now? Is there something that stands out to you that you think we'll all be nodding our head to in 4 or 5 years?
I mean, I can talk about interesting use cases, but like, I mean, I might have been security too long to get excited about anything, but
It's true. I
I
know
am
the
excited.
feeling.
I'm excited to see where these things end up. And for me, like I was saying, it's hard to pinpoint exactly which AI use cases are going to be the most fruitful, because there's so many applications, but we're at the point of the curve where we're not sure of what the best ways to use this new technology are, and
Right,
where the
right.
limitations are going to be, where the trade-offs are. A lot of people that I talk to, um, not founders, but really like just people building stuff, in the trenches,
Hmm.
are frustrated with how they're just being asked to kind of put AI in everything, right? Which
Right, right,
I
right. That's a
understand.
boardroom. That's a boardroom
It's like,
directive
oh my
coming
God,
top
we
down. Yeah.
have to have something that's right. And I understand it. You don't want to seem behind the curve, but at some point, like, buyers are going to get better at asking the question, like, okay, why are you using AI for
Right.
this? And why does AI solve this better than the status quo? And tell me more about the data and the algorithms, and how are you benchmarking accuracy?
How do
And
you?
right and right now, the difference is, like, everyone's just trying to like say they use AI in some way. So as boring as it is, I think the thing I might be most excited about is getting past this initial wave of like AI everywhere, and
Right,
seeing a
right.
little bit more, like seeing us look at AI enabled products more critically, if that makes
Yeah, it
sense.
makes sense. I'm curious of how you. What is a question you ask a security company that is promising AI that can help you filter through what is bullshit and what is real? Is there like a red flag thing that you can pinpoint where it determines whether the AI is real or not? And let me rephrase the question.
Yeah,
There's a bunch of startups promising agentic, a million different
yeah.
things, and a lot of it is built around, like, VC hype ecosystem that has to hype these things. What are some questions I can ask a startup today that determines they're doing something really, really useful, or they're sprinkling some OpenAI shell around something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more they can talk about the algorithms they're using and the data and like the more specificity they get into the benchmarks, how are they measuring like false positives, false negatives, things like that, as opposed to like these like kind of broad statements around applying AI. Like if you go to a booth at a trade show and start asking just
Call
like the
names. We
next
go to RS.
then yeah the next level of, I mean, even a black hat, right? I think the more that they can get into specifics around exactly how they're using AI and why is AI the right thing to be using for this particular problem, that makes for a more interesting conversation because you just do see a lot of people glossing over the specifics of it.
Right.
And so I think that's one way to do it. And developing kind of a playbook of a way to do that is I think still something we're not very, very good at.
Who's doing interesting work today? Any companies or projects or communities you think we should watch? I noticed recently you signed up with a company I'm very familiar with, Binarly. And you mentioned earlier in the podcast about doing binary scanning, which is what these guys excel at. When you think about what, through your years at Veracode and what you guys were trying to do to what vendors, startups are approaching and trying to tackle today, what are some of the similarities you see? What stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, binary is interesting in part because you're seeing it ties in with the AI thing. And as you see like snippets and artifacts being used in different places by AI, I think it's going to be more and more important to be able to identify those little pieces as like, oh, this is a vulnerable piece that came from this library or it came from this other
Right.
place. Um, and just clearly some very interesting, technical work going in there to kind of looking at where software development is going and how supply chain is getting more and more complicated. And so on the supply chain thing, I think that's a good one. I think all the offensive focused agentic AI companies are super interesting right now.
Really?
Expo had some great success on the HackerOne leaderboard, and it's not entirely clear exactly how much of it was fully automated, but it's clearly
It's
an
something
impressive
is
result.
working. Right.
Clearly impressive to get up there in like 6 months, right? Terra is building some agentic pen testing stuff, but stressing the importance of like having humans in the loop for guardrails and verification, which I think is going to be important for sort of enterprise level comfort with deploying these types of things. And disclosure, I'm an LP in one of the funds that has backed them, but I still think what they're doing is very cool. Another company I find interesting is Empirical. You know those guys, right? Mike Reitman, Jay Jacobs.
Old school guys.
Yeah, they're exploring, how to customize local models for better vulnerability prioritization, and as opposed to using these global models, right? And that's one of the big problems we have in security, right? Is like having all these tools that spew out all these findings at us and having no way to put them into context and figure out what to spend our limited cycles on. And it
Right,
spawned
right,
all these different industries around all the ASPM, CSPM. It's all around context and prioritization, right?
right, right.
So anything that kind of gets at the roots of that, I think is going to be super important.
Yeah, and I want to
So
go back to
yeah,
like doing it from binary scans versus doing it from source code, right? Because like I feel like when I asked the question earlier about why are we so bad and why are things so bad, is memory corruption issues everywhere. I mean, Oracle had a big 0 day just 2 days ago that exploded into some big massive ransomware extortion things, right? It's like
yeah,
all through your pipeline source code scanning, and then you ship something and it's still insecure, right? Like all this tooling is within the source code, SAST and DAST or whatever you want to call it. There's still need for some post-build binary scanning that tells someone buying software that, hey, if I'm ingesting this into my thing, I can be sure that at least known vulnerabilities have been ferreted out, or at least there are no dependencies here, or at least help me understand what is the risk I'm absorbing if I'm taking this piece of software in. I feel like there's a big, massive gap there that isn't being addressed.
yeah. Artifacts are being pulled all over the place, right? From the internet, and you've got all these systems interacting with each other, and various plugins and runners are executing, and there's a lot of artifacts that you don't control at all, right? Firmware, compiled libraries, what's even in there.
Right.
If you're lucky, you might get an SBOM, but they're not really verifiable. They're not tied to any underlying technical attestation. Even if you're using an SBOM extension like a VEX that cross-references vulnerability info, those
Right,
are
right.
relying on incomplete vulnerability databases to determine whether to flag something as a
And you
security
still
issue.
need
So,
an independent validation of that at
and
some
that
point.
leads to all sorts of false positives and false negatives. I mean, if you really want to know what you're running, I mean, this is how we talked about things at Veracode in 2006. Like you have to inspect the binary artifact. Um, we foresaw at the time that it was more valuable to look at what comes out of the build and not what goes in. And I think that's still true today. You have to look at what's running. because there's so many things that can happen in the build process and the complexity of it. And so, you know, what was true then is still true now.
That's a great place to end it. Chris, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and come back anytime you have something you want
Sounds
to
great.
say.
Always good talking to you.
Absolutely. All the best, my friend.